to start with, I want to speak about traveling. You've traveled a lot from a young age. You've traveled to India, to Africa, and of course you've lived in Japan when your family moved. How has this influenced your perspective as a writer? And I remember a quote that you've quoted elsewhere, you know, where your father said something like, "There are no races, there's only cultures," which is something quite extraordinary to say in Europe of that time. So speak about how it influenced your writing.
Well, I come from a family of writers and travelers. My grandmother was English, by the way. She, when she was very young, she took a rucksack and went alone, which was very rare for a woman to go alone, traveling everywhere. She was very courageous. From my grandmother, this love for traveling. And then my father also, he was an anthropologist, so he had to travel. And I was 1 year old when we went to Japan. Mm-hmm. So for me the first the first experience were travel experience. Mm-hmm. And yes, I wrote also a book about traveling, which is called The Seduction of Elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Elsewhere. And yes, I think this has been important for me. You know, when you travel, you know other cultures, you know other people, you know other languages, and you understand that you are not in the center of the world. I try to write from a responsible and how can I say, to have a view, a detached view of things, not too fanatic. I hate fanatism. I don't like people who are fanatic.
Right. And another thing that runs common in your works is your interest in women and women's lives.
Yes.
How do you think the position of women has changed over the years in your lifetime in Italy?
Well, no, it changed a lot. I think that the situation of women in Italy have changed specifically after the 68, you know, the movement, anti-authoritarian movement of the 68, which spread around all Europe. And we were so, the women in Italy, they had very restrictive laws, no? I make an example. For example, if there was an adultery, mm-hmm. and the man denounced the adultery of the woman could go to jail. Instead, on the other side, the adultery of the man was not considered.
Was not condemned.
No. And that's one of them. Then there was no divorce. Then there was no equality, in the sense that if you had the same work, you wouldn't have the same pay. Now, for the law, you have to have the same pay, which naturally is not practiced always, but the law says like that.
Yeah. Obviously, you know, historically, Italy has been very rich in the arts and culture, and very progressive. Do you think that has changed in the Berlusconi regime? How do you look at it?
Yes, Berlusconi, you know what he introduced in the Italian society through his television, because he had 3 private television and the control on the public television. That's the terrible thing. And what he introduced was a consuming idea of the culture. The idea that is more important to sell and buy than to be. No? Mm-hmm. So everything could be sold and could be bought, even persons, even ideas, even bodies, etc. Which is, I think, very dangerous, very dangerous. Which is a market culture, you see. Yeah. He introduced it in the Italian society, the market culture. Then, so, for example, school, no? He says the school doesn't produce anything. What do you mean, though, it doesn't produce? Mm-hmm. It's very important, the school, because it produces the future citizen, which is very important. So you have to invest on the school. And instead he said, no, the school must be a producing place where they must already start to understand how to produce.
Do you think that compared to other countries, say the US, Italy wasn't so vulnerable to this idea of the market and consumer culture before the Berlusconi regime?
Well, there is a tendency in the modern culture, naturally, in which the market is very important. In the industrialized country, there is this tendency and this danger, but you correct it with investment on the culture, on research, on thought, on awareness, etc. But he believed that this was not important. And so he gave, through television, the models. You see, the problem is that the models for the young people were models of commercial models. That means that it was important to be there, to be young, beautiful and productive. If you are not young, if you are not beautiful, not productive, you don't exist anymore, you see, which is very unhuman. Maybe even before there was a kind of selling of votes, for example, or personage in the parliament. But under his government, he became, I mean, people didn't hide anymore, because maybe it was also before there were people who were selling votes or selling themselves, selling their ideas, but they wouldn't say. I mean, it was considered something to be, how do you say, ashamed of. Instead, it became so clear. I mean, it became clear that it was normality, and normality that a person who was staying in another party was bought by Berlusconi, and it was a normality that he changed his ideas to become to go with him because he had some money. He would even say it publicly, which is terrible. Means that you're not shamed at all. I think many people react. I must say that there is another Italy. But many young people, you know, they were seduced by it because they are coming out with the wonderful landscapes, wonderful houses, wonderful places, rich people, and so everybody wanted to be like that, like a diva. And instead the life is much more difficult, complicated. You have to work, you have to study, you have to go deep inside things.
So what do you think it meant to you as a writer, and in general, do you think the world of art, culture, film was more impoverished because of that? You know, if you look at...
Yes, in a way also because they cut many important things that have been for the art have been important, have been cut by the government. But I think in the same time, paradoxically, the world of the artist became more strong, more how can I say, more
urgent?
more participate, because people, artists usually were alone and individualist and working by themselves. But this thing made them create a solidarity of the artists, and there were many artists who react with writings, with strikes, with public speech, with any kind of reaction. But this, yes, put it together, the artist as it was not before, it was not so clear.
So, you know, when you started working, this is again something I read, you were considered much more controversial than you are now, you know, because of the ways of that time, perhaps.
Yes.
And you talked about how you felt so alone at that time, and now that you have, you know, you're known globally, your work is out there and it's received in many countries, it's become easier for you. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey in terms of, you know?
Yes, well, when I started, it was hard because it was always hard for those who begin. The beginners are more. It's difficult for a girl to start. At the beginning I didn't earn any money, so I was doing other works, for example, secretary, or I was working for a photographer, and then I was working for a journalist, and then so I tried to find any kind of work because I was poor, I didn't have money. Then I started to write, and I must say that the first novel had a certain success, so I could earn some money from but I went on for years and years and years working other things, for example in the movies, making screenplays, working for newspapers. At the beginning it was also difficult. The critics are, always have difficulties to accept women works.
Do you think that still holds?
It's still, yes, there is lots of discrimination, yes.
All over the world, do you think that?
Yes, yes, I think more or less.
Sure.
The things are getting better.
But it still exists.
Yes, but for example, in the field of the market, there are not so great problems because the market is open. No, if you have a success, it's open, you are male or female, doesn't matter. And specifically because the readers are women. The majority of the readers are women. But if you go to the literary institution, that means anthologies, universities, high school, etc., you will find, and critics, you will find that the women disappear.
Why is that?
Because there is a discrimination in the world of the institution, literary institution. So 2 years ago I went to Cuba, and when I was there, Italy was in a book fair, and Italy was the guest of honor. So when I arrived, they gave me a booklet of there was the list of all the important Italian writers. I looked at the book and I said, but there's no one woman, not even one. And I said, but why? And they said, well, we don't know any female writer in Italy. And I said, why do you don't ask or inform yourself? Because there are plenty of women writers, but they are less known. Yes. That's the problem always, even with Chinese, Japanese, Indian, all over the world. Yeah, I mean, some of them at a certain moment they arrive, but they make a much more fatigue. It's much more difficult for a woman to be taken serious and to have prestige. Because she can also sell thousands of books, but to have intellectual prestige is very, very difficult. And this is still is true everywhere. Everywhere, more or less that.
You wrote a critique on Madame Bovary, and you wrote
a book,
about how the relationship or the motivations of fiction, in the sense that the writer's relationship or his fear of women made him portray Madame Bovary as this sort of dislikable character.
Yes, that's right. I studied the Madame Bovary, which is a book I like very much. Flaubert, I think, is a great writer. But in the same time, I discovered that he has a identification with the character. Very great identification. By the way, he said, Madame Bovary, c'est moi, is me. But on the other side, he, at a certain moment, he felt in danger, being so much identified with her. So he started to detach himself from the character. And at the last 3 or 4 chapters, he becomes more and more cruel against her. And at the end, also other writers said, why he has been so cruel with Madame Bovary, and why he takes 3 chapters to make her die, you see. And it's true that I think he needed to detach himself from the character because he loved her, but in the same time he couldn't accept to be so near her because she was a sinner. She was a adultery woman, and then she was a woman, first of all. Generally, the relation between a writer and his character, which is very, I think, very dialectic and complicated, because it's true that the writer wants to identify with the character, but in the same time he wants to be detached. So there is a conflict between the two. And in the case of a woman, I think the conflict becomes more and more strong.
Yeah. So what is your relationship when you're writing a male character? And how much of your characters also come from your life or your experiences?
No, I mean, in a novel, specifically when they are historical novels, I don't, I mean, I can identify, but they are invented characters. And well, there is something of me, it's normal. There is a projection of the writer in the character. But no, I don't put myself. I try to create really another character. And then, you know, growing, getting old, I understood that it's very important to be humble and to listen to the character. You have to understand what he's doing, what he's saying, because the character knows better his own destiny, you see. And so if you listen to the character, you don't have to impose things to the character, because the character tells you things about himself or herself, you say. Because, you know, sometimes the writer has this sort of presumption to be like God, you know, you say, I decide what the character should do, should be, should think, because I am out and I'm the person who decides, which I think is not true. I think that the character has his own autonomy, and sometimes knows better what he has to do, you see.
Sure. And what is it like for you when you're writing a male character? Is it any different? Or?
No, I think it's more or less the same. I mean, the character needs a certain freedom. And if you follow the character, if you give him freedom, the character comes out with ideas, with the personality. And I think the best thing is really to follow the character.
Yeah, sure. Fine. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you.